Hey guys, today I'll talk about my top 5 Space Marine always good units that are consistently performing well from one edition to another, and I highly recommend to include them in your collection. So without further ado, let's dive right in. I'm going to be looking at a lot of factors here, mostly how unit performed from 8th edition to now in 10th edition, and how likely is it, considering all the factors we have, for it to go to being bad or unusable, so that it's not a good investment for you. Obviously, disclaimer, this is a lot of predicting and relying on my personal experience, so don't go buying 1,000 points of, for example, Blade Guard veterans just because I said they're good. Other than that, let's talk about what they are. They are the first dedicated elite melee unit from the Primaris line that was ever released. They were released in the famous Indominus box and were one-of-a-kind unit that I was really waiting for, and I love them since. The reason is they are one of the few units that have inbuilt invulnerable save. They are elite, meaning that it's not a big concentration of models. It's actually very few models, but a lot of concentrated power in them. And they're also 3 wounds each, even though they are a lighter frame, which we're going to talk about later. At toughness 4, they have 3+ save now. They had 2+ save back in 9th edition, and 4+ invulnerable save because they're carrying the Storm Shield. Have good melee. They always had quite a few attacks. They now have 4. They had 4 for a while now, and they are strength 5, AP 2, damage 2, so they always had those master-crafted power swords, which are damage 2, and that's great because that allows us to get more wounds through when we are actually getting through the armor save. And unless we're targeting something that's -1 damage, they're gonna be, if they are actually dealing with a toughness issue, they're gonna be good against pretty much any monster vehicle, heavy infantry, or anything like that. The current special rule is reroll once to save or hits in the fight phase. They can turn on one or another, which is nice, and it's better than not having a special rule at all. Of course, we are very envious of the Black Templars Sword Brethren, because those guys get to either increase their attacks or increase their damage, which of course that would be much better any day of the week than this for the Blade Guard, but at least we have something. And these stats that I've just shown you are very similar to what they had in 9th edition, so they seem to be quite consistent, and that's a very good niche to occupy, because it's a niche of non-heavy but elite melee infantry. Why that is good is because we are getting those damage capabilities up, so elite unit means that it should be fighting well in combat. However, the lighter frame gives them ability to get into transport, so they can now get into impulsors where, for example, Gravis or Terminators cannot go. They occupy less spots in a Land Raider or Storm Raven, anywhere where you would be counting how many models something occupies. So the Terminator always is 2, Gravis is always 2, where these guys consider to be smaller frames. So even though they are 40 mil base size, they still only occupy 1 seat. It also means that they are lower price and they have more character options, because Terminators are now only going with Terminator characters, Gravis also with Gravis characters. It's a new 10th edition thing, but we always had more characters in that normal Primaris size than we had Terminators or Gravis. So no matter which direction the new edition goes, if we still are eligible to include a character in a unit or not, we still will have more options, and that will very likely somehow influence this squad. And even though they're a lighter frame, they still retain some of the durability from being 3 wound models, so 2 damage things and 1 damage things don't kill them as efficiently, and they also have 4+ invulnerable save always, just because they carry those shields. They were always good from one edition to another, so I highly recommend to have at least 6 of these guys in your collection, just to have that option. And plus, they are quite good now in 10th edition currently with the Gladiator detachment, in my opinion. Unless you're a fan of these models, I would not invest in more than 6 currently, unless we see something that actually incentivizes you to buy more, but 6 will be a good start for any kind of list where you might want to include them. As always, if you're looking for help building your roster or your collection, check out the links to my Patreon in the description, because I provide personal assistance for that there. Next are the Aggressors. They were released back in 8th edition with the introduction of the Primaris Marines in general, so alongside the Hellblasters and regular Intercessors, and they occupied a very interesting spot of hybrid infantry where their damage comes from both shooting and melee. So this means that they are quite dependent on the rules that are available currently, so they were up and down all the time, but they always found their way to being usable. And currently in 10th edition, they're actually very, very good, one of the best damage dealing units we have available. You do have to solve some problems for them, like mostly their threat range, which they need to fight, so they need to get into combat, and they also have the guns that are short-barreled or flamers, which are usually a short range, so you need to get them closer to your opponent, and that problem needs to be solved one way or another. Hence their dependence on the rules available. They were always pretty good in combat, and they were able to punch up into monsters and vehicles, and even now with Twin Link they still can do that, and they have quite a lot of attacks. They always had, ever since they got an extra attack from 8th edition, when they realized that these guys actually have 2 fists, so it doesn't make sense for them to have so few attacks. And having a 6-man magnetized unit, so flamers and bolters were always competing for the primary dominant spot, so I would highly recommend to have them magnetized. It's not that difficult, though they're not the easiest unit to do that with, I'll be frank with you, mostly because you need to magnetize the back part of their ammo, whatever it is, the ammo carriage, the thing that feeds the ammo into the guns, essentially, or the cables. You need to magnetize that to the backpack, and that's a finicky process. Plus, you need to magnetize the top of their fists, which is the spot where the actual gun is mounted, because you cannot magnetize the gun itself. It's too complex of a shape. But there are good guides on YouTube, so I'm sure you will be able to do that, or if you want, you can just order them in vf.miniatures Painted Studio and we'll do it for you. Link will be in the description. I hope you'll pardon my little shameless plug here, but the man gotta eat, so what can I do? In any case, I'd not recommend to invest in more than 6 unless you really like the models. I personally have 12 just because at some point I had a crazy idea of running 12 of these, and I do really like how these guys look, but 6 will be more than enough unless you're fine with keeping a bit more money sitting on the shelf instead of your bank account. Next is the Redemptor Dreadnought. You know me, a video without mentioning the Redemptor Dreadnought is a wasted opportunity, so here he comes. In all seriousness, I really think these guys are awesome. They were consistently good ever since 9th edition. Back in 8th, they were okay. They had some survivability issues, as pretty much any vehicle without an invulnerable save had survivability issues back then, so it was obvious for them to have problems. They solved that in 9th edition with the introduction of -1 damage for the Dreadnoughts and Redemptor specifically, and ever since he did not let down. He was always a staple for Space Marine lists, and having 2 or better 3 of these is a must-have for your collection, in my humble opinion. Definitely do magnetize it, because even though Plasma was good in 9th and 10th now, I really think that at some point they're gonna switch it and the Gatling is gonna be better again. You can also, with some conversion and magnetizing an extra bits, you can make him a Brutalis Dreadnought as well, because it's the same chassis, it's just the gun and the hand are different, and a little bit of posing and the nipple guns as well. So if you are into this kind of thing, gluing, cutting, and using green stuff, then you can make out of these 3 combo of Redemptors, you can make it Brutalis or Redemptor combos. You actually need them is just by the virtue of how the model looks. It is supposed to be good. It's hard to make this model bad. It's a mid-sized walker, so it cannot be super expensive. You can make it like 400 points or something, and it cannot be too slow because it has legs. So yes, it could be a 6-inch move, which would be not great, but thankfully in 9th and 10th edition it was 8-inch move, and that is enough. And they, most importantly, can both shoot and fight because they have a big gun and they have a big fist. Unless GW want to really screw with us, they will probably keep him at least decent for both, and imperfect with both of these will make it perfect with synergy. By synergy, I mean both buffs that you can apply to this model and just increase his ability to do damage consistently in both shooting and melee, and the fact that you being active with this unit in multiple phases is synergy all by itself, because it just gives you more activations. It means more opportunities to actually affect the situation on the tabletop. Plus, the Dreadnought chassis implies durability of some sort available, and nowadays it's 2+ save and -1 damage. In 9th edition it was -1 damage. In 8th edition I don't think they realized that this thing is supposed to be durable, and it just had a bit more wounds. So we hope that they will not forget about this thing in the 11th edition. Next are the Centurions. These guys, the chunky boys on 50 mil bases, they were always packing a punch from one edition to another. Great thing about these guys collection-wise is the fact that you're essentially buying 2 units in one, the Assault and Devastator variants, so the melee option and the shooting one. You're getting all the bits necessary to actually build a full kit out of them. I've done that for the Deathwatch as well, so you will see them at some point on the channel in the battle reports. And I have a 6-man unit which can be both Assault or the Devastator options. There is some trouble with the cables and things like that in the back, but if you're willing to have a little bit of leeway there, you don't even need to magnetize them. They are very tough infantry, basically on the same scale as the cavalry and small monsters. They are really, really chunky and huge, but it's still possible to hide them if you want to. They are slow though, so be careful with that. And they are now 4 wounds each and toughness 5, 2+ save, which they were the same in 9th edition, as well. They always lack the invulnerable save, but somehow I don't think I've ever considered that to be a big issue for them, because if something shot them, something really nasty, it usually killed them anyways, and they usually were just brought down with volume of mid-AP fire. They are great now in 10th edition with their shooting, and to be honest, I also like their melee variant as well, because they are quite nice from the Land Raider. Just one of the cheapest things you can put inside a Redeemer if you really want to put something there and you don't want to invest in like a full Sword Brethren squad or something like that. You can put the Assault Centurions in there, and they will do a lot of damage to vehicles and monsters. Mostly we will see them used as a shooting unit in the Vanguard detachment, just because it allows them to teleport around, and they also get some protection from -1 to hit and cover from the detachment, and they also get a nice buff in terms of +1 to hit and AP for their guns from that detachment. So we'll see them there and possibly in the Gladiators as well. They are very good, and remember the good old days of 8th edition when they were incredible as Imperial Fists, if my memory serves me well, and they use the heavy bolters just to get insane amount of damage onto any target back when Strength 5 was capable of wounding anything in the game on 5s, and that really meant a lot of damage. They do have some model issues, is their inherent slowness and the lack of transport options, because everyone understands they're chunky, so they have to take up a lot of room in transport, so they take up 3 slots in anything that can carry them, and that's not nice, and that's why you have to solve the problem of their mobility somehow. Hence the Vanguard detachment. For the collection, I will highly recommend having a 6-man unit with full mechanization, so that they can be both options if you're willing to put a little extra time in painting those bits. And believe me, there are going to be a lot of bits. Here is a photo of how that looks for the vf.miniatures Centurions. So yep, as you can see, the amount of bits you're going to paint is humongous, plus that does not include the actual nipple guns, as I call them, the bolters or the rocket launchers, which you will have to paint as well and magnetize as well. I'll repeat, it is worth it if you are building a long investment Space Marine collection. You are gonna need the Centurions at some point. Next are the Interceptors. So I always had a sort of love-hate relationship with them. I didn't like the design, how they look, the posing as well, for some reason when they were just released. But slowly I really understood their looks and I grown to love them. You know, there are some units like that in the 40k that you just need to look long enough at to really start to appreciate their inner beauty. This one was that unit for me. Initially, they were also released as the first wave of Primaris back in 8th edition, and then they were just a gimmick unit, more or less. They had some strange mortal wound output when they charged something I think was called Meteoric Charge, which obviously is not something they're supposed to be doing. They only have guns in their hands. They're supposed to be shooting and staying well away from any melee. But then in 9th edition, GW understood they're not selling enough of the Interceptors, so they made their plasmas much better. And I think they also did something else, which it's hard for me now to remember, but they buffed the shooting. And they did not let down ever since, the Interceptors. They do have inherent advantages in the fact that they are a shooting unit that also has jump back, so it must be mobile, and the fact that it only has guns means that they have to shoot well, because it's the only thing they are supposed to be doing. Unlike the regular Terminators, they are Stormbolter plus melee, so you can say, okay, there's some shooting, there's some melee. None of those are supposed to be that good, because it's a hybrid unit, or even the aggressors, which again, GW could say, okay, they can shoot, they can fight, so they should not be that good in either of these, otherwise it'd be an overpowered unit. With Interceptors, there is no consideration like that, there is no worry about that, so they can make them really good in shooting, and they are very good in shooting now. So I highly recommend to have a 6-man unit for fully magnetized Interceptors, so don't buy those easy to build ones from, I think it was the starter of 8th edition box, which just flooded the eBay market and every second hand market out there with the easy to build Interceptors. You might want to buy them if they're cheap enough, and if you want to have just dedicated bolter ones, because bolter ones are again on and off, good and bad from edition to edition. So that's what I did. For example, I have a 6-man unit of dedicated ones, dedicated bolter ones, and another 6-man unit of magnetized ones, so they can build both bolters and plasma. But definitely do magnetize your first 6-man unit of Interceptors, because they're gonna serve you well and long. Lastly, a bonus one, the Humble Rhino. I just really wanted to add this thing here just because it's such a veteran of so many battles, and it is really a good thing to have in your collection, though it's not that good now in 10th edition just because of the lack of firstborn units that we would love to put in there. That's the problem of the Rhino. The value of its capability to transport things is directly proportional to the value of the unit inside it. So yeah, the problem now with them is that apart from Death Company and maybe Death Watch veterans, you're not really gonna use it much unless you're playing Thousand Suns or Death Guard or other armies where the Rhino is actually very good because they only have firstborn, so to speak. Now with Space Marines, because we have those gladiators, we have those impulsors, we have land raiders, everything else, Rhino is kind of on the back foot currently, but I do think that we will still see a resurgence of them in the future. Just let's appreciate the fact that somehow it allows us to compact 12 Astartes models armored in a volume that looks like it can only house 6 or 7 models, and that's already pushing it. So it's a magical thing in and of itself, and it feels like at some point there's always going to be a moment where you want a Rhino in your collection. You want to put something in a Rhino and move it from point A to point B. So I recommend to have 2 of these in your collection, especially if you are running multiple factions in a similar-ish kind of color scheme, where you can use this Rhino for your Space Marines and later on, for example, I don't know, for your Sisters of Battle. Then it is definitely a worthwhile investment. Those Space Marines and Sisters have different upgrade packs, so you probably want the Sisters Rhino to be much nicer looking than the plain Space Marine one, but you can try to avoid the extra flowers and everything so that you can use it for both factions. Then it is more than worth it. Let me know what are your always good Space Marine units, because this list is definitely far from being comprehensive, and I would love to hear your answers in the comment section. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.